first time I understood true power, I was 16 years old. Not from landing a perfect punch or executing a flawless kick. No, I was standing alone on a mountain overlooking Hong Kong Harbor, the city lights blurring through my tears. That morning I had been expelled from my master's school. My crime, questioning the sacred traditions, daring to blend Wing Chun with boxing techniques I'd learned on the streets. Disrespectful, they called it. Arrogant. Maybe they were right. But as I stood there, something crystallized within me. A truth so profound it would eventually reshape martial arts forever. The most dangerous prison is not one rigid thinking, blind tradition. The most powerful weapon is not the fist or foot, but the mind free enough to absorb what serves it and discard what doesn't. You feel that resistance right now, don't you? Choose your path, follow the rules, stay in your lane. But something deep within me rebelled against these artificial boundaries. Why choose when I could integrate? Why limit myself to one tradition when I could learn from many? This wasn't arrogance, though many called it that. It was the recognition of a fundamental truth about human potential that few are brave enough to embrace. Think about your own life for a moment. How many invisible barriers have you accepted without question? How many times have you heard it's not how we do things? Or stay in your lane? Or know your place? These phrases aren't just words, they're chains, designed to keep you contained, predictable, small. When I arrived in America in 1959, I carried with me not just my physical training, but this dangerous idea that tradition should serve the individual, not the other way around. That true mastery comes not from rigid adherence to a single system, but from the ability to absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. The martial arts world wasn't ready for this. Neither was America. Neither was I, truly. Because to live by this philosophy means to walk a lonely path. It means to question everything, including your own most cherished beliefs. It means to stand alone against the comfortable tide of, this is how it's always been done. I remember opening my first school in Seattle. Traditional masters shunned me, called me a heretic, a betrayer of ancient wisdom. Students came expecting a traditional sifu, bowing to ancestral altars, reciting ancient creeds. Instead, they found a young man asking uncomfortable questions. So why do you practice this technique? Is it because it works? Or because your master taught it to you? If it doesn't work, why keep it? If something else works better, why not use it instead? Some left, uncomfortable with the responsibility of thinking for themselves. That voice questioning whether you should listen to me, whether these ideas apply to your life, your struggles, your dreams. Good. That resistance is the sound of your mind's prison walls being tested. And by the end of our time together, those walls will never look the same again. I promise you this. What I'm about to share isn't just about martial arts or physical training. It's about the battle you face every single day when you wake up and look in the mirror. The battle between who you are and who you could become. Between the limitations others have placed upon you and the limitless potential waiting to be unleashed. But I warn you, once you understand this truth, you can never go back to the comfort of your old constraints. Are you ready to begin? Let me take you back to 1959, Hong Kong. I was a young man caught between worlds, Chinese by birth but raised partly in America. Trained in traditional kung fu but fascinated by Western boxing. Everywhere I turned, someone was telling me to choose. Choose your country, choose your style. Others stayed, sensing the power in what I was offering. Not just techniques of the body, but liberation of the mind. This is the first and most difficult barrier you must overcome. The addiction to certainty, to the comfort of being told what to do, what to think, how to live. Most people will trade their freedom for this comfort without a second thought. They'll follow a flawed system their entire lives rather than face the terrifying responsibility of creating their own path. I see it in business leaders rigidly following outdated models while their companies crumble. I see it in relationships where people repeat the same destructive patterns generation after generation. I see it in fitness, in education, In every aspect of human life, this desperate clinging to one way things are done, even when that way leads to failure, stagnation, and despair. But you're different. I can sense it. You wouldn't be listening to these words if something within you wasn't already rebelling against these invisible chains. Something in you knows there's more. Something in you is ready to break free. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed for me. I was training intensely, as I always did. Hours upon hours of the same movements, the same forms, the same techniques. One day, in the middle of a form I'd performed thousands of times, I stopped. Just stopped. Standing there in my cocoon, sweat dripping to the floor, something cracked open inside me. In that moment of stillness, a question formed. What am I really training for? Not to perfect this form, not to please my teachers, not even to defeat opponents. I was training to express myself freely, sweetly, honestly, and suddenly all those rigid forms, all those fixed patterns felt like chains rather than tools. That's when I truly understood what it meant to absorb what is useful, discard the rest. It wasn't just about taking techniques from different martial arts. It was about a fundamental relationship to life itself, about approaching everything, training, relationships, obstacles, opportunities, with an open mind and a critical eye. This is the essence of what I eventually called Jeet Kune Do, not a style, but an anti-style. Not a system of additions, but of deletions. Not about accumulating techniques, but about honing down to what is essential, what is true for you. Now let me ask you, what are you carrying that no longer serves you? What beliefs, habits, relationships, or patterns have you accepted simply because they were handed to you? What would happen if you examined them honestly, keeping only what truly works for your life, discarding the rest without sentiment or attachment? I'm not asking you to abandon everything you know. I'm asking you to question it, to test it against reality rather than tradition, to own it rather than inherit it. When I first began teaching Americans, I noticed something fascinating. The students who struggled most weren't the physically weak ones. They were the ones who came with years of training in other styles. Their cups were already full of techniques, yes, but more dangerously, of assumptions about what martial arts should be, about what they themselves were capable of. Before I could teach them anything new, they had to empty their cups. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. They had to become beginners again, which is the hardest thing for someone who identifies as an expert. You face the same challenge in whatever field you're in. The more you think you know, the harder it is to learn. The more successful you've been following the rules, the harder it is to break them, even when breaking them is exactly what's needed. There's a famous Zen story about a professor who visits a master seeking wisdom. The master serves tea, but doesn't stop pouring when the cup is full. Tea spills everywhere. When the professor protests, the master says, "I, like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This emptying is painful. It requires admitting that many of your certainties are actually assumptions, that much of what you've built your identity around may be limiting rather than defining you. This is why most people resist it with all their might. They'd rather defend their limitations than transcend them. But I'm not interested in most people. I'm interested in you, the one who's still listening, who feels something stirring within, who senses that there might be another way. Now let me share with you the 3 principles that guided my development of Jeet Kune Do. Principles that can transform not just how you fight, but how you live. First, research your own experience. We have been conditioned to look outside ourselves for answers, to experts, to authorities, to traditions. But the most valuable knowledge comes from your direct experience. When I tell you a punch should be thrown a certain way, don't just accept it. Try it, feel it, test it, see if it works for your body, your temperament, your situation. This applies to everything in life. Don't outsource your truth to others, no matter how credentialed or confident they may be. I remember training a student who kept attempting a complex kick that clearly didn't suit his body type. When I suggested an alternative, he protested, and my previous master said this was the best technique. I asked him, "Does it work for you?" He hesitated, then admitted it didn't. "Then why keep it?" I asked. He had no answer. He had been valuing loyalty to his teacher above effectiveness, tradition above truth. How many things are you doing right now in your career, your relationships, your health? Not because they work for you, but because someone you respect told you they should work. How much of your life is being lived according to someone else's script? The second principle, absorb what is useful. This requires humility and curiosity, the willingness to learn from anyone and anything regardless of its source. When I studied Western boxing to incorporate into my Kung Fu, traditional masters were scandalized. That's not our way, they said. But I wasn't interested in our ways, I was interested in truth. Look around your field, whatever it is. Where are you ignoring wisdom simply because it comes from an unexpected or even rival source? What could you learn from your competitors, from other industries, from fields that seem entirely unrelated to yours? The greatest innovations often come from this cross-pollination. Steve Jobs didn't revolutionize computer design by studying other computers. He studied calligraphy. The most creative chefs don't just read cookbooks from their own tradition. They explore chemistry, history, psychology. But here's the crucial part. Absorption isn't blind adoption. Which brings us to the third principle. Discard what is useless. This is where most people fail. They become collectors rather than curators, accumulating techniques, ideas, possessions, without the discipline to eliminate what doesn't serve their purpose. I trained with a man who boasted he knew over 200 different strikes. I asked him to show me his best one. He couldn't choose. He had accumulated so much that he had mastered nothing. Contrast this with the famous quote attributed to Bruce Lee, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Look at your life right now. Where are you spread too thin? What are you holding on to? Relationships, projects, possessions, habits that no longer serve your core purpose? What would happen if you had the courage to discard them? This isn't easy. We become attached. We think, I've invested so much time in this relationship, this career path, this approach, I can't just let it go. But that's precisely the thinking that keeps you trapped. The time you've already invested is gone. The only relevant question is, does this serve me now, moving forward? When I developed Jeet Kune Do, I had to discard techniques I'd spent years perfecting, not because they were bad techniques, but because they didn't fit the streamlined, direct expression I was moving toward. This wasn't just physically difficult, it was emotionally wrenching. These techniques were part of my identity, but holding on to them would have held me back from becoming who I needed to be. What parts of your identity, your self-concept, your habits, your relationships are you clinging to even though they no longer serve the person you're becoming? What would it take to let them go? Let me tell you a story that changed how I thought about limitations. In 1964, I accepted a challenge from a local Kung Fu master in Oakland. He objected to my teaching non-Chinese students. The agreement was simple. If I lost, I would close my school. If I won, I could continue teaching anyone I wished. The fight lasted 3 minutes. I won decisively. But what struck me wasn't the victory itself. It was what I learned about my own limitations. During the fight, I had reverted to my Wing Chun training, ignoring all the innovations I'd been developing. Under pressure, I fell back on habit, rather than adapting to the moment. This realization shook me. I'd been preaching adaptability while still being constrained by my own training. After that fight, I shut myself away, re-examining everything I thought I knew about martial arts. This led to the breakthrough that would define my approach, the understanding that true mastery isn't about perfecting a style, but transcending it altogether. This is the challenge you face right now. Your greatest limitations aren't external, they're internal. They're not the limitations others place on you, but the ones you've internalized so deeply you no longer recognize them as choices. Think about it. What truths about yourself do you accept without question? I'm not a morning person. I'm not good with numbers, so I don't have the discipline for that. And I could never speak in public. These aren't facts, they're decisions, and you can make different ones. But to do this requires something most people aren't willing to give. It requires being uncomfortable. Growth happens at the edge of your comfort zone, where you're balanced between security and terror. Most people, feeling that edge, retreat back to safety. A few lean into the discomfort, understanding that's where transformation happens. When I initially arrived in America, I spoke terrible English. Giving interviews, giving classes, and communicating difficult thoughts in a language other than my own was humiliating. Every day, I had to choose between speaking Cantonese with other Chinese immigrants and pushing through the difficulty of learning English, the easy or growth path. What comfort zones are you currently hiding in? What growth are you delaying because it involves discomfort? Remember this: discomfort is not your enemy. It serves as a guidepost for your next progression. Now, let me share with you the everyday practices that helped me live the idea of absorb what is useful, discard the rest. Actions you can start applying right away to break free from your own limits. First, conduct a daily audit. Take 5 minutes each evening to reflect on what worked for you today, what did not, which of my behaviors helped me achieve my goals, and which were habitual time wasters. Be relentlessly honest. This is not a judgment, but an appraisal, like a martial artist analyzing combat footage to better their technique. The second step is to practice your beginner's mindset. Once a week, purposely place yourself in a scenario where you are completely inexperienced. Take a class on a subject you know nothing about. Read a book about a topic that is not your area of expertise. Talk to someone whose life experience is vastly different from your own. This keeps your thinking fluid, your ego in check, and reminds you how to learn rather than simply applying what you already know. The elimination challenge comes in third. Each month, choose one thing to eliminate from your life, one habit, commitment, or belief that may have helped you in the past but no longer does. Create space for something new to emerge. Fourth, the cross-training principle. Whatever your core field, make time to learn about other fields. If you work in business, study psychology. If you work with technology, consider studying design. If you work in healthcare, consider studying philosophy. These intersecting points frequently yield the most profound discoveries. Finally, the expression practice. Find at least one chance every day for honest self-expression, unfiltered by societal expectations or professional roles in your true voice. This could be accomplished via writing, conversing, moving, or creating. The medium does not important. What matters is the practice of discovering and expressing your truth. These activities are not difficult, but they are tough. They require you to be conscious when habit would be easy. They require that you question what others take for granted. They ask you to accept the risk of being misunderstood. I was continually dealing with this misperception. When I mentioned emptiness, many assumed I meant nothingness. When I questioned classical martial arts, several people believed I was disrespecting tradition. When I argued for simplicity, some accused me of being simplistic. But here's what I discovered: being misunderstood is the cost of innovation. If everyone immediately understands and agrees with what you're doing, you're not likely to break new ground. You're probably just confirming what everyone already knows, is comfortable with, and accepts. True innovation, whether in the martial arts, business, science, or any other profession, is always met with resistance. The question is not if you will be misunderstood, but whether you will have the confidence to persevere nonetheless. People felt I was intentionally confused or contradictory. When I first described Jeet Kune Do as a style without style, they didn't understand what it meant to transcend style, to develop a method based on principles rather than fixed procedures. It took years for this concept to become generally understood and accepted. What vision do you have that others cannot yet see? What fact have you discovered that does not fit into existing categories? Do not abandon it because it is difficult to explain. Don't make it taste better by watering it down. The most significant ideas frequently begin as seeming conflicts. Now, as we near the end of our time together, I'd like to address the ultimate difficulty of this philosophy, the challenge of identity itself. Because to properly absorb what is useful, discard the rest, entails taking your sense of self lightly. It implies recognizing that who you are is fluid, not fixed, and is continually being created by your decisions. Most individuals consider their identity to be something they find once and defend forever, such as, I'm a lawyer, and I'm an artist, I'm an introvert, or I'm bad with money. But what if your identity is something you create rather than discover? Not a goal, but a journey. Not a noun, but rather a verb. When I said e-water, I wasn't only referring to physical adaptability, I was discussing the mobility of self. Water does not have a constant shape. It transforms into what it needs to be dependent on the circumstances: ice when cold, steam when hot, a raging river or a peaceful lake, depending on the landscape. What does it mean for you to, one, be water in life? To allow yourself to alter forms as needed, to flow around barriers rather than crash against them, to carve new pathways while the old ones are blocked? This is not about giving up your essential convictions. Water, regardless of its form, is always water, H2O. Similarly, you can retain your essence while altering your expression. Your values define your molecular structure. Everything else is negotiable. This transition was an ongoing process for me. On film sets, I was an actor. In my Kwun, I was a teacher. In my studies, I was a philosopher. With my children, I was a father. I didn't separate myself by appearing to be various individuals in different settings. I expressed several facets of the same integrated self, responding to each situation's needs. This fluidity represents power. It is freedom. It is the ability to respond to life as it is, rather than as you would like it to be or fear it will become. And that brings us full circle to the terrified, enraged 16-year-old standing on a mountain after being rejected by his martial arts community.